Hey, welcome back to the channel and to another short story of exactly 1,000 words inspired by a piece of artwork. Well, at least I attempt to make a short story and then I deconstruct a little bit. But before we get there, before we even look at the artwork, you'll know that based on the thumbnail, there's a little bit of snow outside. It's a little chilly, so I had to choose a chilly soundtrack. And so I chose one titled Polar by the artist Doom Catacomb. There is plenty of ambience to be found there. Wind, creaking ships, although there are no ships in this artwork. So why don't you put on a coat, maybe a scarf if you're a scarf type person, and cue up the icy tones while we check out this week's artwork. This week's artwork is titled Winter Journey, and it's by an artist named Greg Rutkowski from Pińsk, Poland. I can't remember how I discovered this one because normally I check the trending page, which inevitably has newer pieces of artwork. This one was posted 5 years ago. But again, something about his work really caught my eye, and specifically, it was the brushstrokes here. It looks like a very classical medium oil, let's say. And if you check out his portfolio, he has a very diverse set of pieces of art, some more contemporary, you could say, that represent a very digital look, and then a lot that are like this, which seem very, very traditional. So when I first looked at this piece of artwork, I wondered what that man was thinking, who was walking out away from this cabin. And I thought he probably had an interesting story to tell. The one detail I do love is the fact that there's still smoke rising from that cabin, meaning either there is someone still inside or maybe he just left. But either way, wherever he's going, it appears to be a very arduous journey. It appears to be there's some finality to it even. And someone to embark on a journey out into this dense snow truly has somewhere to be. So Greg, thank you so much for the inspiring artwork. I look forward to checking out the rest of your stuff. So that said, let's see what I came up with. The sun eased the mountain shadow along the expanse of snow that had fallen last night, and Connor wondered how far it would go. He observed this from the center of his small cabin, through a small window, changing hands on a broomstick, which he'd polished smooth from overuse. His hands, however, were anything but smooth. He took the bristles to the wood floor again, spying another cone of dirt just beside the far leg of his small table, pushed beneath the small window. It seemed as though no matter how much he swept, there was always another. So he took to it, scooting it along the floor gently toward the door, where he had guided all the rest. For some reason, keeping its form was important to him, as if a family of ants lived inside, and he was just relocating them. He succeeded with the task and allowed himself the luxury of a smile, which he saved for special occasions. He supposed it was a special occasion. This smile, though, as soft as it was, revealed that he'd missed a spot shaving this morning. His scarf would catch on it, wiggle it back and forth, driving him mad if he didn't take care of it. So he took to it, looking into the skillet he'd polished about as clean as the broomstick handle. It hung on the wall above a narrow table, upon which sat a chipped white basin. It had somehow turned itself around, showing its scar, so Connor turned it to face the wall. After shaving, he tied it up for the second time today. He parted his hair to the left, then to the right, then gave up altogether and left it mussed, like his mother still lived here. Still lived. To keep your forehead warm, she said from beneath blankets of dirt and stone and snow. His face in the pan got blurry, but he supposed it always had been. Connor saw a fold in his bed that wouldn't do. He smoothed it back and forth, but it wouldn't tame. Must be something deeper. Must be something stubborn. He stripped the bed down to the frame of hand-carved oak, which had been carved by his father. In the old man's image, it seemed, with the boards all spindly and broken like he'd been for years. Connor covered the memory with his mattress of stuffed cotton, then his sheets, and finally the quilt that always lay on top, heavy like the snow outside. Only cold for a time, his body quick to heat with the smoldering fire near the foot of the bed. A dangerous luxury, but he was his own man with his own responsibilities, and if he died in his sleep, there'd be no one around to chastise or mourn him anyway. The bed was smooth, almost like no one had ever slept in it. A photo in a catalog people had stopped to admire its rustic simplicity. He laughed, imagining the people in the city poring over that very photo. Then he imagined their nice things and nice family, and decided he was done imagining. The fire, the only one here doing any talking, Connor decided to keep it company. Not that he didn't have places to go, But the fire had been a dear friend of his since he'd found himself alone, chattering incessantly, but he was a man who preferred listening. Not sure what to say, Connor said to the fire. Not that you're listening, not that you can listen or understand. Goodbye, I suppose. Saying the words aloud made him feel stupid, so he stopped and gazed at the burning wood. Crumbled, the wood smoldered half black and half crawling with what looked like those little glowing wires inside a light bulb. Not that Connor had seen a light bulb in some time, just once when he was a boy, through the window of a shop where an old man with spectacles, who looked just like the man who should work there, waved at him like they'd been old friends. Connor pushed the stones he used to keep the sparks at bay closer to the smoldering wood, lined them up in a perfect half circle. Like the hearth had a big bottom lip, it was sticking out. It was perfect because he checked it from all angles. Nothing left to adjust, he brushed his hands on his legs and stood. He fetched his rucksack, coat, gloves, Winchester, and jacket before heading to the door where his boots and walking stick leaned against the wall as if having a conversation. They were probably wondering what this crazy man was doing talking to a fire, making his bed twice, and sweeping this place top to bottom until not a speck remained, wondering why he was so meticulous when there was no one coming, the boots wondering why they weren't gagging on his feet because they were ready to move on, the walking stick wondering why it wasn't biting fresh snow because it was ready too. He thought about answering them, but knew he'd feel worse than stupid. Another word dangerous to imagine. Connor put on the boots and picked up the walking stick, and they were quiet. He didn't look back into the cabin because he knew he'd find a wrinkle in his bed or an anthill on the floor or a fire that needed listening to. So he took to it, stepping outside and not stopping until he counted 300 steps. Only then did he turn around. The cabin looked smaller than ever, leaning too much to the left, wearing a thick cap of snow and smoke, even wider, curling proudly into the sky to show the mountains who could go higher. He hoped his memory of it would endure. Connor pulled his scarf up over his nose, not because he was cold, but because he had nothing to say. So he took to it, wondering how far he would go. Welcome to the Interviewer. I'm so glad you made it. This is where I talk about my final thoughts, what I liked, what I didn't like, maybe what I learned. And so I think immediately you can tell not a lot happened in this story, but let's take a closer look at the art again because I need to explain my thought process. So we have a simple cabin in the background. We have a man who's walking away from that cabin in the foreground. He looks like he's a little bit contemplative, maybe what is ahead of him. I'm not quite sure. And the only interesting fact, honestly, is the smoke rising from the chimney in the cabin, because does that mean there's somebody else there? Does that mean he just recently left? And so honestly, that was the only bit of narrative I was left to play with in this art, and had to concoct the rest of it myself, which is totally fine because I don't want the entire story spelled out for me, obviously. But let us begin at the beginning, where we should always begin. And we see the sun is easing the mountain shadow along the expanse of snow that had fallen last night. And Connor, the man is named Connor, he wondered how far it would go. What I was trying to do here is I was trying to put this guy in a situation where he needed to go somewhere. I never once described where he needed to go or why he needed to go there, but that's what I wanted to do. And this entire story really is about somebody making every excuse they can think of to not do the task they need to perform. And that is for him leaving. And so he's doing all these mundane tasks over and over and over again, just any excuse to stay put, not leave the comfort, the so-called comfort, the assumed comfort of this cabin anyway. And the shadow is essentially a metaphor for him, because you'll know at the very end, he thinks the same thing. He wonders how far he will go. He's observing this entire scene from this window, this very small window. I was trying to use repetitive phrases and terms as well to hopefully emphasize the way he thought about his surroundings. Small window. He's polishing this broomstick smooth from overuse, but his hands were not smooth. He's very overworked, maybe. He's a very calloused hand man, and he's spending far too much time pushing dust around the floor of the cabin. And this is a phrase that I repeated, and it was not just willy-nilly. It was for effect. It had a purpose. It kind of just popped into my head, honestly, at the first time, and then I used it as a device to repeat over and over again, because so he took to it, right? Meaning, there is a task to be done, This task is he's avoiding what needs to actually be done. However, he is interrupted, well, distracted, I should say, by all of these other tasks, making his bed numerous times, finding he needs to shave more, cleaning the floor, tending to the fire, and so on and so forth. So that's the first time I mention it, when he's going to sweep. The second time I mention it is when he's starting to shave, noticing the chipped basin, and the beginning of a little bit of subtext of a scarred life, when he notices the chip on it and then he turns it around to face the wall. And this scar opens up, so to speak, when he's talking about his mother. Well, at least he hears his mother speaking to him, talking about his messed up hair, his bangs to keep his forehead warm. She said, from blankets, beneath blankets of dirt and stone and snow. And this line right here, I'm trying to play with different things to convey ideas or convey actions or imagery without actually saying it. His face in the pan got blurry, but he supposed it always had been. So you could take that a couple of different ways, right? You could take it that the pan itself is just not polished to a mirror sheen. You could take it that he's crying, right? He's tearing up a little bit because, you know, when you tear up, your vision gets blurry. Not that I ever cry. But then also his face in the pan is blurry, meaning he sees himself that way. What does that mean? Does that mean he's lost a sense of identity? Does that mean he views himself in a different light? I don't know, but those are the kinds of things I'm doing, is trying to say things plainly, but have multiple meanings behind it. At least two meanings, I should say. You know, you want to state what is happening here, right? He is seeing his image blurry in the pan, but then you also want some subtext there. I think that's something I'm really putting an effort toward trying to do, because if you've read any craft books, you know that every line, or most every line anyway, you read should be doing double duty. It shouldn't just exclusively be doing what it's saying, right? Because again, all of this is through the lens of the character, at least if you're writing in limited third or first person. And I bring his father into the tale through the image of a bed frame, when he believes that his old man carved it in his image, it seemed, with the boards all spindly and broken like he'd been for years. And then Connor covered the memory with his mattress of stuffed cotton, then his sheets, and finally the quilt that always lay on top it. That's sort of a transition, and I'm trying to do things like that as well, where rather than saying something like Connor didn't want to think about that, or Connor stopped thinking or distracted himself, right? I'm using an actual physical action, right, to cover the memory, right? He's making the bed, which essentially is covering up the memory of his father. Again, you know, double duty, triple duty, however much meaning you can get from that. Even though this is a very simple story, I use that opportunity to slow down a bit, right? And try to practice things like that. And then he notes that the bed was smooth finally, after he made it this second time, almost like no one had ever slept in it. You know, more subtext, there you go. But then he starts thinking about that it is perfect, right? It's like a photo in a catalog that a family might admire for its rustic simplicity. But then he starts imagining them, and there's a little bit of a turn there where he imagines their nice things and the nice family, and he decided he was done imagining. Because even though that thought process made him laugh about somebody, you know, poring over this image in a catalog, it brought up memories of what he doesn't have, and that's a family. And because Connor never really speaks to anybody in this entire thing, with the exception of the fire, I decided to personify the fire. I imagined him sitting in here in the solitude and the quiet, maybe the wind's moaning outside if there is a wind, but there's always that persistent crackle of the fire that I must have in here because of the smoke rising from the chimney. And so that is what I do. The only person he ever says goodbye to is the fire, and he awkwardly says, not sure what to say, Connor said to the fire. Not that you're listening. Not that you can listen or understand. Goodbye, I suppose. But he felt stupid. He's aware of it, right? He's talking to an inanimate object. And I'm not sure where this came from. I think the image of the cinders and the fire reminded me of the filament in an old incandescent light bulb. But I wasn't really sure where to put him time period wise, right? Is this recent times? Is it in the past? I didn't quite know. And so I'm just kind of ambiguous here, where he just saw a light when he was a boy through a window of a shop where an old man with spectacles who looked just like an old man who should work there waved at him like they'd been old friends. So a little bit of backstory, a little bit of the idea that he doesn't live with light bulbs or electricity. He's a very simple guy living in a very simple cabin. And that's really all that did, is it just kind of detached him from society. It pushed him away from it, so you would understand what his life has been like. This is not a quick stop. This is not a vacation cabin. This is somewhere he's been for a long time. And finally, he gets all of his items, his rucksack, coat, gloves, Winchester, and jacket before he heads to the door. And there's more personification where I have the walking stick and his boots looking like they're having a conversation, just kind of leaning against the wall. Like, imagine two guys leaning against the wall of a bar outside, maybe smoking, having a beer, having a conversation. That's kind of what I imagined. But they're impatient. They want to go, right? He can see their impatience, even though, again, inanimate objects. And this line here was more self-reflection. So he thought about answering them, but he knew he'd feel worse than stupid because he just talked to the fire. Meaning crazy, another word, dangerous to imagine. At first I wrote crazy and I thought I would imply it. I thought that would be more interesting. And I think the one thing I'd like to add here or change here would be he counted to 300 steps. I think there'd be more interest there if I had some significance to what that meant. I just randomly 300. I was looking at the image and I'm like, I can't really tell how far that is. I was thinking about, maybe he walked 50 yards or something. But what I think I want to do is maybe this is as far as the shadow crept. When he was first looking out the window, wondering how far the shadow would go from the mountain, maybe that's what it is. And so I think that's a great metaphor for a threshold that he's going to cross to kind of leave behind his own house. That is, I think, what I'm going to change it to when I go back and edit this stuff. But he looks back at the cabin. He sees it wearing the snow. This is more or less where I'm kind of painting the image. He's out there walking away from it, taking one last look. And this last line here was a little bit of a turn. So he's pulling his scarf up over his nose. I'm trying to complete that picture, and you think because he's cold, but rather than have it be used logically that way, I thought it'd be cool to take it back to what I've created about him. He's not speaking very much. He has no one to talk to. And so that's what I said. Not because he was cold, but because he had nothing to say. And then finally, the last line, so he took to it, wondering how far he would go. To just bring it back to the beginning, because that's what I like to do. I like to go full circle with my stories, sometimes more literally than others. That is it for the story. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed its simplicity. I really do like writing simple stories like this because it gives you the opportunity to try to dig a little bit deeper with characters sometimes, because when there's not a lot of action going on, when you know you're not trying to get a character from point A to point B or have all these conflicts, maybe there's multiple characters in the situation, or maybe the character is in some kind of dire situation, you're able to practice things like this where these lines have dual meaning and you can say things in a descriptive nature in narrative fashion and then actually illuminate character. And so I think it's a great exercise. So if you're out there used to writing crazy action scenes, just breakneck pace all the time, slow down a little bit. I challenge you, slow down. Do some introspective work, but not through monologue, right? Not through indirect thought even, through the narrative itself. Try to illuminate character through narrative description, because remember, I encourage you always to write from the character's POV. Not that there's anything wrong with omniscient, but I think it's a really great practice to try to write in a limited POV, if it's first person or limited third. So thanks for hanging out with me. Hope you enjoyed the story as always, and keep reading, keep writing, and I will see you next week. Thanks. Bye. If you'd like to read the story in its non-video format, check the link in the description. I didn't edit anything else, promise. Thanks again.